There we go. Okay, now we're gonna get started. Sorry to interrupt the conversations. If you want to find a seat, most everybody's seated, and last chance to grab snacks. Cool. Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see you all here. Icebreaker question for the day, because I always apparently have to say something silly. Who is scared of spiders in this room? Who sees a spider? Thank you for being honest. I will raise my hand. There's only 2 or 3 of us. Riker, you're in between.
It's a black round.
Okay. Sure. If it's a spider that can kill me, yeah, I'd be scared too. Wow, very few people are spider. Who is I love spiders.
The scared people wouldn't show up.
That's a good point, Carl. That's a great point. Does that cause a correlation? Would you say spiders? Oh, does he? So is there anyone in here that's I especially like spiders? It's not like I'm just not scared of them, but I think they're awesome and amazing.
My friend Katie had a tarantula in the dorm, which you're not allowed to do.
What?
But she did.
Oh.
Dude, if I knew one of the guys in our dorm had a tarantula, I would move floors.
Shoot it.
Maybe. I'll put a maybe on that one. Okay,
I know.
Good to know I'm one of the only wimps here tonight. Hopefully it'll still be fascinating. Thank you all for coming. I know that week 4 homework starts ramping up. It only increases, but hopefully these nights are a little bit of a nice break to hang out, have community, eat some maple donuts, and hear a very interesting talk. I'll just get right to it. Tonight we have our very own Carl. Most of you have probably met him at this point. I'll let him introduce himself. But I'd say my favorite quote from Carl was when talking about bugs and studying bugs. Someone talked about, well, that would be boring. And I looked at Carl, and he very happily was saying, someone's got to do it. He was right. Someone has to study the bugs. But tonight we'll figure out why it's actually very cool and very interesting. So I'm going to begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll just launch right into it, and I'll let Carl introduce himself, and then I'll come up after and do a few announcements. All right, bow your heads with me. Dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for this campus. Thank you for each person here and how you've brought them here. We just praise you for these beautiful days in Colorado where we can appreciate the mountains and the scenery despite the homework that might be piling on top of us. We can enjoy the beauty around us. So we just praise you for that. Please bless Carl tonight. Help him to speak well and fluidly and efficiently and just edify us in teaching. I pray that we would learn and be fascinated by the wonders of biology and your creation. And that we would just have things to take away that really sit with us, that this wouldn't just be for enjoyment, but that we would learn something profound and that we would apply it to our lives. So in your name we pray, amen.
All right. Good evening. So I am Carl Christensen. So I guess an important question is, what qualifies me to get up here in front of you and talk to you at all about spiders? It's because once upon a time I read an article in Ranger Rick magazine. And that's all I got for you. No. No, so I do have so my bachelor's degree was in wildlife biology, conservation education. And then later on I went to get a master's degree in entomology, which is study of bugs. Insects. Now, so make sure we get the distinction right here. Are insects the same thing as spiders insects?
No.
No, why not?
They have too many legs.
What's the difference?
Too many legs.
Number of legs.
They don't even have wings.
How many legs? Not all insects have wings.
Oh.
How many legs do insects have?
6.
Good. How many spiders?
8.
Good, okay.
And actually, the average spider has less than 8 legs.
What? Okay. Yeah, because they eat up with other things, right? What else?
Body segment?
Okay, how many in an insect?
3.
3. How many in a spider?
2.
2. Okay, any others? Do spiders have antennae? No, they don't. Do insects?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, they do. Okay, so those are the notable distinctives. So yeah, so I studied entomology, not a strong emphasis on spiders, but I do think they're very, very interesting, and they kind of fall under that category of arthropods. If you're an entomologist, you kind of like arthropods in general. My research was actually with everyone's favorite insect, The mosquitoes. Ooh. So I am not a spider expert, but I have enough background information to do that. And this is our house pet.
So nice.
This is the only house pet I have. Donald's got a dachshund. I have a Chilean rosehair tarantula, which I have had for 19 years.
Whoa.
The female spiders can live in excess of 20 years. And she was full grown when I got her, so I'm not sure how old she is actually. But I would have brought her tonight, but.
Thank you for
I
not
didn't
doing
let
that. Thank you for not doing that.
So now the thing is, spiders I think get a little bit of a bad rap, and people in Hollywood like to take advantage of people's fears of spiders. So, several of the Indiana Jones movies took advantage of that for, scare and thrill factor. But what's really interesting is this would never happen. Right? If you went into a cave, would you find a bunch of tarantulas? None.
No, they're alone. They roam around. They're
So one, they're solitary. You're not going to have 100 tarantulas all together ready to drop on top of you. That wouldn't happen. And they wouldn't be in the cave in the first place. Okay? That's not because what is true about spiders is that they all are predatory. They're eating other animals, other insects. Are you going to find those in a cave? Not so much, okay? So they're really kind of pulling a boo-boo here in making this happen. Now, what's interesting, so you remember this scene. So they put all the spiders on this guy's back, and they wouldn't move. Well, that's not good for a movie effect. The problem was they were all females, and they just sat there. So what did they do? They went and they got a male spider and put the male spider in the mix, and all of a sudden everyone's like, woo, 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 and they actually got the spiders. So the other thing with spiders is realize that there's lots of different kinds of spiders, okay? So we have the web weaving spiders. We're gonna kind of focus on that, but everyone around here has always seen the big wolf spiders, they're this big, right? I was just talking about, we had jumping spiders that are so cool. Many of them are really, really small, although I have a picture on my phone. I got one that's like this big, pretty big. But usually they're small, and people don't get close enough to them to appreciate, I think, how beautiful they are, because they've got a lot of eyes, and they're like jewel color. So really cool. Here's my tarantula. I love crab spiders. I think they're fun. They are ambush predators. They'll just sit on a flower and wait for a spider or something to come along, and then they nab them. I have a picture on my phone. I didn't download it. I was up hiking last weekend and found a crab spider. Just had already caught a bee. So if you want, I'll show it to you. And then we have trapdoor spiders. And all of these we have here in Colorado. So question. Anyone have a favorite? A favorite?
I think it's called the golden wheel spider. It lives in the dunes, and then when it gets chased by a predator or such, it starts to roll on its side, going down a hill.
Interesting. Okay, and where is that?
I have no idea.
Okay, maybe in the Sahara Desert or something like that? Or...
All I know is that it's like my favorite because it's just so unique.
Yeah. That's very unique behavior. Any other favorites?
Spider-Man.
Oh. He actually is going to come into the presentation, just so you know, just so you have something to wait for.
Spiders are evil, but jumping spiders are little whimsical fellows. I do enjoy them. I must confess.
I saw a video once of spiders scuba diving. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, they can capture air bubbles in the air on them and actually swim in the water. Some, not all. So, for our talk tonight, we kind of need to narrow things down a bit. I have, this is the standard text on spiders. And it's still, even today, it was written like 20 years ago and it's still like that textbook. And there's so much in here, it's like, that's amazing, that's amazing, that's amazing. Now we can't do all of it. So we've got to narrow this down a little bit. So what we're really gonna focus on is silk production and the construction of orb webs. Not all spiders can spin a web. Only certain spiders can do that. So we're really gonna hone in on that feature of spiders. And then the claim I want to make is that these features of the spider, I think, are indicative. They're good inferences for us about intelligent design. Okay? So we're really gonna try and grapple with two things. I would like you to be stunned and amazed by the amazingness of spiders, and that could just be good enough. But there's more. It's like the Popeil commercial, right? And there's more. And I think the more is that I think we can find out some things about the God who made them. That these do point to intelligent designer. So I'm gonna reveal my bias off the top here, okay? So in terms of intelligent design though, I think it would be helpful for you guys to realize there are a number of misconceptions about intelligent design. So if you have conversations with people about this, kind of be aware of some of these. One of them, and I talked with somebody about today that raised this. So if God was the one who made everything, he's an intelligent designer, then why would there be these imperfections in the world? Things that we don't like. There's diseases, or things don't work maybe as well as they ought to work, right? Well, so I think we have to recognize, first of all, that's not a scientific claim, that's a philosophical claim. And it's a philosophical claim that rests on omniscience. That person is claiming omniscience. They somehow know, if there is a God, what kind of world would he create, right? And so I think it's fair for us to push back on that. Scripture tells us that God himself claims that he is the bringer of calamity, that he brings trouble into the world. Do you have to like it? No. But philosophically, we argue, and of course, this really points back to like an arguments for evil and suffering. Why are these things in the world? And I think here we want to say, I don't have an answer for every bad, evil thing that we see existing in the world. But is it possible that God could have a morally compelling reason to allow evil and suffering and things in the world? And all philosophers have to say, yes, there is. And I don't know what they are, okay? But to make this claim that an intelligent designer, if he was really intelligent, he wouldn't have all these imperfections. And that is a mistake. It's a philosophical mistake. The other thing is when we think about designers, and how many of you are like mechanical engineers? Yeah. A lot of you are mechanical engineers.
I
So
mean,
you probably know this more than anyone else, but if you're in electrical engineering, civil engineering, these things come to bear
computer
as well.
science too. Computer science too.
What?
Computer science as well.
And computer science, I think, do. Yeah, anyone who's doing any kind of engineering, we have this issue with what we call systems engineering. Where we have, when we're building something, it's not one system, it's multiple systems that have to be put together, and you have to make trade-offs. So that one part of, say, let's say I always use your laptop computer, right? We would all like a laptop computer that would have a battery life of 8 weeks. Wouldn't that be great? What would your laptop look like? Yeah, we'd have to take it around with a cart, right? So we have to make some trade-offs. We'd like it to be better in some fashion, and it's maybe less than what we would like it to be. But does that mean it wasn't designed? No. So you make some missteps there. The other thing is a lot of people will claim, well, that intelligent design is not science. But people who try to promote intelligent design theory want to say that yes, in fact, it is scientific. Now, why do you think they say it's not scientific?
Because you can't observe the designer.
Okay, you can't see the designer doing it. Okay, but I never saw the designer make my car.
Right? It's not repeatable.
Okay, so these ideas of repeatability, will it succumb to experimentation, right? Yeah.
I mean, the good faith assumption is that they assume it's more of a philosophical viewpoint more than something that is a philosophical viewpoint of what science has shown. But the bad faith viewpoint is that it stems from an assumption that religion must be opposed to science.
Right, which we know is not correct.
Yeah.
But so the problem here is that is it correct to say that all science is of an empirical nature?
I mean, not exactly.
No, it's not. We like it if we can do that. We like it if we can do an experiment, collect data, and draw a conclusion. We like that. But not all science has access to that. Luke's a geologist. Okay, you were telling me about, talking about stuff down inside the earth. Any empirical data for that?
Right.
No. And so if we go out on the cuts out here on I-70, and you see all those layers of rocks, and a geologist will say, well, we think we know how these different layers got there. Do they have empirical evidence for that? They do not. So this is what's referred to as inferential evidence. All right, so there's a lot of scientists, so forensic scientists, archaeologists, geologists, all rely upon what we call inferential data, inferential evidence. Now, there may be some experimental data behind some of those, but we're looking at some things that we cannot observe directly, and we draw inferences. And this is precisely what evolutionary biology does, and this is what intelligent design does. We can't repeat or make the creator do this again, but do we have some features that might infer that? And so there are two kinds of reasoning, logical reasoning, that we typically rely on in science. One is inductive reasoning. The other is what's called abductive reasoning. So who can tell me what inductive reasoning is? What are we doing?
Looking at the evidence.
Specific to general. So I conduct an experiment in my lab. I discovered this is how the material stuff behaves if I do X to it. I'm always gonna get Y. And then what do? I say, okay, because it happens in my lab, I think it can happen everywhere. So we go specific to general. So abductive reasoning is what we do when we have inferential evidence that we're working with. So we're trying to explain something that we see out there in the world, and how do we go about it? And there's maybe competing theories about explaining how this happens, and in science we often run into that. And so what we have to do is weigh those things out. Which of these explanations is the best? Which one answers the most questions, right? That's abductive reasoning, and that's very scientific. Yeah.
The question about the systems engineering part. So I understand the trade-offs between the battery example, like what you were saying. But I feel like if you apply that to God, you'd be limiting his power by saying that he has to acquiesce to the different trade-offs in a system.
Well, not necessarily, but of course that becomes this philosophical thing of, would God be okay? Is God wanting to make a world that is not, where everything's not perfect and everything works well? We clearly don't live in a utopia. And is God okay with that? Well, clearly, because this is the world he put us in, okay? But the point is, not that God could or couldn't do that. But the question is, if we see trade-offs in systems, so they're suboptimal, right? Does that negate the presence of a designer? No. Okay, and so God was okay with making things that had suboptimal performance. Although you're kind of splitting hairs when you look at some of the systems in biological systems and it's like, wow, that works. That's amazing, right? And here's another thing that you need to hold on to this idea. There is a misperceived notion that science restricts itself to material causes, it can only use material causes to explain the world. Is that true? No, there is nothing in science that insists upon that says, oh, you cannot invoke immaterial causes. But we do that in a lot of different sciences. Archaeology, forensics, right? I'm not invoking natural laws to explain who spattered the blood on the wall, right? That we look to some form of agent causation to explain what happened in that room. It was not material explanations entirely. We have to be open to different aspects of agent causation. And so we can do the same thing in biological systems. The last one is people will suggest, well, this is just like code word. And we're just trying to smuggle in creationism. We're trying to smuggle in some kind of religious idea. And again, this idea that it's not scientific. And so they'll say things like, well, and I talked to somebody today who said similarly, well, isn't that just a God of the gaps argument? You're just arguing from ignorance. And I said, no, actually, because a God of the gaps argument is arguing from what you don't know. And intelligent design is actually arguing from what we do know. There are key features of intelligent activity that we are aware of that can also be shown to be true in biological systems. So if they're there, then why not infer that there was some intelligence behind it? It's a fair conclusion. But some people will unfairly and incorrectly exclude an explanation. Now, what's interesting with intelligent design is intelligent design is not excluding material causes. What you're doing actually is getting a bigger toolbox to help you explain the world around you. It's all the stuff that the material scientist would point to and more. We have more that's available to us in terms of our trying to explain the world around us. So we actually have positive evidence. So here are some examples of like markers, indicators of things that demonstrate intelligent agency. One is information. Where does information come from? Just the world in general. It just floats down from the clouds.
Well, it's a manifestation of understanding the world.
Okay, so I go on my phone and I Google something and information pops up on my phone. Where did it come from?
I mean,
Whose?
okay, I'm the computer science student in the room. It would be, it's transferred over a wire connection over a long distance to a data center somewhere where the information is stored on a hard drive, which is probably using some level of magnetic system. So in the end, the information is encoded with magnetic
And
polarity.
where did that information come from?
Functionally, it didn't. It didn't. There's nothing that. Information is not really an object as much as sort of the way something is structured.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
We identify information based on structure. And for us, it has to specify something that we can relate to. But where does it come from?
Like we see things and then we record it and it becomes information.
Yeah, so let's be clear. AI doesn't come up with information on its own.
Nope.
It got it from somewhere else. It went and searched out, in a sense, the minds of people. People who put down stuff on paper.
Language models are a mirror of the human psyche.
Yeah.
That's generally the consensus currently.
Right. So information comes from a mind. Okay? Appearance of novel structures, new information, stuff that. So in evolutionary biology, we think organisms have structures because it was modified from some prior ancestor. But what if you have a structure that's present in a particular species that is not present in any related species? Where did it come from? Where does this new information come from? Evolution makes its bread and butter based on modification. We're going to take existing information and we're going to modify it, get something different, okay? But it is want in being able to account for the development of new information. Yeah.
I think C.S. Lewis's The Space Trilogy, The Lost Planet, gives a good idea of what this would look like. So we can draw inspiration from the world around us to try and create new things ourselves. But if you had God create something entirely new, we would have no point of reference to go off of what it would look like from here. Like the way Lewis writes it in his book is like the character is trying to make out what this new creation is, but you can't describe it because it's unlike anything he's ever seen.
Right. And Lewis would say, we as humans can never come up with something completely new. It doesn't connect to something else that we have previously experienced. We're not capable of doing it. So where does new information come from? Irreducible complexity. These are structures, so classic example is bacterial flagellum. Maybe some of you have heard about that. So bacteria have a whip-like structure that has the ability to move the bacteria. The structure that does that consists of 40 different proteins. Now, if you remove any one of those proteins, the bacterial flagellum is non-functional, can't get there. And the reason why we're thinking it's irreducible is that you cannot have built that flagella from something else, where you just stepwise add this protein and it does something, then you add another protein and it does something, and you keep adding these proteins, and at the end of the day, we end up with a bacterial flagellum. Well, the problem is that's not the case. If you take any one of the proteins away from a bacterial flagellum, it's non-functional. So it can't have any kind of precursor.
I mean, the counterpoint to that necessarily is that it did have a precursor that was less efficient.
But it's non-functional. It's like purely non-functional. It's not like it has some other function. We added a protein and now it has a different function. It doesn't do anything. And to make matters worse, to get the bacterial flagellum, those 40 proteins have to be assembled in a particular way. So you also have to have plans to construct it, which that's another layer to the problem. Chicken and egg problems. I've got system A, I've got system B. In order for B to function, it needs A, but in order for A to function, it needs B. Which one came first? You can't say either one, right? So this is this idea that you had to have some insight or foresight to get these two systems to be coexisting, to be interdependent. Okay? Innate behaviors. Things they come out of the egg and they can do stuff. And no one taught them, right? Where does that come from? We're gonna get into that. We'll talk a little bit about this. Top-down versus bottom-up approaches to development or to engineering. And then one that some people suggest is inspiration for human designs. And of course, you've probably heard it said that any good engineer is someone who copies nature. Because in a lot of senses, nature has already kind of solved the problems. So if you're a good engineer, you just go copy what's already been done. Okay? Now here's what I want to do. This is my thought. I'm going to take a quick survey over spider biology. okay? We can't go too deep. We don't have that much time. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to try and look for any of these, okay? And so at the end, we'll come back to this and see if you can identify any of these things in the activity of a spider making webs. Got it? Okay with that? Okay. So when we think about a spider building a web, there are a number of things that have to be considered. One is the silk, the material that is built on. And that comes along with some glands. So there's some structures in the spider that produce the silk. Then once the silk is produced, it has to actually be able to articulate that silk and move it and build it into a web. So there's these structures called spinnerets. A fourth thing we're going to talk about is how does the spider manage to navigate the web? How does it get around on this thing that is supposed to be designed to catch insects? Look at that. And then the other thing we'll take a look at is all the web that you see here in this web is not all the same. There are different kinds of silk here, and each one has a purpose. Okay, so we'll talk about how that gets organized, and then what is the actual process in which a spider builds that web. So let's talk about silk first. Now, some of you might be aware that there's a lot of human interest in spider silk. And you know why?
Really
What do you
strong.
Better tensile strength to steel.
Okay, so really incredible difference in terms of tensile strength. So here's some research that was done. So here's this toughness factor. So steel gets a 6. Okay, here's Kevlar at 50. Okay, here is the silk that is used to make the main framework of a spider web. It's at 180. So many more times tougher. And so people have thought, hey, look, and especially compared to Kevlar, what do we use Kevlar for? Bulletproof vest, right? It's better, it can resist, it can absorb the energy from a bullet better than steel, and spider silk can do even better. And here's insect silk, by the way. So this comes from silkworms, right? So it's even better than steel. But look at that number. So everyone's really kind of interested in doing it. Another thing that people have been thinking about is use in medical for like sutures. So you get something more permanent you need to stitch in place inside you. Maybe you're repairing a hernia. Maybe you're putting a valve in place in your heart. Well, how long do you want those sutures to last? A lifetime would be nice, right? So if we could actually produce spider silk, this would be really good. And guess what? We've tried. And we have failed. We've not been able to do it. Now, the first attempt, we think of, so we got to rely on genetic engineering, right? Find the gene that codes for spider silk, put it into a bacteria, and let the bacteria do its job. We produce a lot of proteins this way. A lot of your pharmaceuticals, this is exactly how they make these drugs. The problem is, for spiders, the protein's too big. So the pharmaceutical proteins that we produce are much smaller molecules, and a bacteria can handle it. This protein's too big for spiders. So what have we done? Well, we go to a larger organism, and they inserted the gene for silk production in nearby the genes that help produce milk in goats. And so they were able to get goats to produce some of this protein in their milk. What was interesting is that when they pulled this protein out and tried to strand it out, its strength was down here. It was nowhere near what spider silk was.
We get some process after protein creation.
Right. Well, so as it turns out, we have to have more than just finding a gene and doing some genetic replication of it. Here's another thing to think about, because when we'll come back to this again. there's actually more than one kind of silk that spiders produce. So in web spinning spiders, they actually produce 7 different kinds of silk. Each one is produced by a different gland. And so each one has a different composition, each one has a different purpose. Form follows function. Okay? So the one that is of real interest for material scientists is this one right here. This is the major ampullate silk here that forms the framework, and it's also what spiders, if spiders, you see spider coming down from the ceiling, that's this kind of silk. Okay, it has a good tensile strength to it. But spiders do other things. So this web has to get anchored down, so there's a different silk for that. They put a auxiliary spider that helps the spider navigate its construction of the sticky stuff. So there's a sticky web and then there's a non-sticky web. And in order to be able to put this down, it has to walk on this kind of stuff, right? So remember we said spiders are predatory. Web spinning spiders in particular will spin web to wrap their prey in silk and immobilize that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So they do that, but then that same silk is also what they will use to line the inside of an egg sac. They actually use 2 forms of silk to make their egg sac. So this one is a more softer kind of silk, and then they have another silk that is produced to create the outside layer, so a little tougher for protection. So 7 different kinds of silk. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on this one, all right? But kind of keep it in the back of your mind. What I'm saying for the production of this kind of silk is going to be true for all the rest of them. So in silk, it's fundamentally a protein. So there are particular amino acid groups. So here they're just showing alanine, glycine amino acids that are coming in sequence. These are really typical group clusters of amino acids that are made to build this.
What the fuck is happening here?
We're talking about intelligent design and spiders.
Oh, it's the same job made spiders?
What?
The same job made spiders?
Nope. So
We could have probably brought him in a little bit more indirectly.
so some of you are familiar. So when we put a bunch of amino acids together, then they're to be functional. They have to be folded. And there are 2 kinds of general folds. There are alpha folds, which are spiral, and there are beta pleated sheets that just kind of fold back and forth. But even with beta pleated sheets, after those get folded, there are 2 routes to go. And so in spider silk, we see 2 different things. We see the beta pleated sheets will actually form spirals. This is what scientists think is what helps give the elasticity to spider silk. And then it forms also, you don't see quite as well in this diagram, there are some like crystal-like structures where they're just blocks of the amino acid. And this is what we think gives it its toughness. So you have both. We've got something that's really, really flexible, but also very, very tough. And so these get all strung out together to create, and they get pulled out together to line the silk to form fibers. But there's more, because in addition to having these protein fibers, they will produce different kinds of materials, glycoproteins, some lipids, some other proteins that coat the fiber. That actually adds to its strength. So it's not just the protein. This is one of the problems of trying to recreate spider silk. It's more than just the protein. You have all these other associated compounds that come with it. Now, this is an article actually just got published a couple weeks ago. And I'm not showing you the whole, there's a really, really long list of contributors to this. But one of the things they did, so you can read this, origin, structure, and composition of the spider major ampulate silk fiber revealed by genomics, proteomics, and single-cell spatial transcriptomics. So here we're mostly looking at, what was the base pairs that are involved in the gene? What are the proteins that are being produced? So if you look in this diagram, now this is a lot to look at, but let me point out a couple things to you. So one of the things they found is that in this major ampulate silk, there's not one protein. There are 18 different proteins that compose this, okay? So that's what's being listed here. So up from here down to here. These are the 18 proteins that are found in the ampulate silk. Now what you're seeing here, so these are the 7, well actually we're only looking at 5 different, and this is just the body as a whole, and this is just the head as a whole. They did some sampling in body parts. So these 5 here are some of the different kinds of silk. The ones we're focusing on and what this study focused on was this major ampulate. So if we follow this row up here, you'll see this difference in color. That's indicating how much of each of these proteins is expressed in the fiber. And then what you're seeing over here, these are kind of diagrammatic of the protein. So you can see that they have some different compositions to them. They have different lengths to them. So they're not all the same, and they're not being all produced in the same quantities. So we have some more reason here why it was so difficult for us to produce the silk. Now this is good information for us because it's giving, if we really want to manufacture spider silk, we need to pay attention to what spiders do. Okay, and it's a lot more complicated than we thought it was. Now, the question then becomes well, how is it possible for these glands, for this one gland to be producing all these different proteins? And so just a quick, if you remember high school biology, remember that all the proteins are coded for on your DNA, okay? But it doesn't go directly from the DNA to the protein. So first we have to copy the DNA in the form of RNA. But the process doesn't stop there. A lot of high school biologies, they oversimplify it and they say, okay, we go from DNA to RNA, boom, protein. Not that simple. Not that simple, okay? Because within the strand of information, some of these, so what they're showing here, these colored regions, these are protein coding. The ones in between are not. And so what has to happen before we build the protein is there has to be some splicing of the RNA. So it will remove, the cell will remove these sections, squish together those colored sections, and then it can read off the A, T, C's, and G's to produce the protein. But now here's where it gets really, really interesting. Because this one gene actually can produce multiple different kinds of proteins by mixing and matching these different regions. And that's what they're trying to show here. So in this case, they did all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But here, it excluded number 3. And this one excluded number 4. And after doing that, each one of these is a different protein, has a different function, which is mind-blowing. That you've got this one gene that can produce multiple different kinds of protein. So this explains how a spider can do that. But now, one of the things that evolutionary biologists are trying to look at is how do we account for all this variety that's seen? And they're invoking this thing called epigenetics. Anyone ever heard of epigenetics? A couple of you. So the idea behind epigenetics is that in the environment actually can have a role in determining how genes are expressed. Unfortunately, this doesn't become a source for variation because the variation already has to be present. So this adds another layer in terms of gene expression because you have to have chemical signaling that goes on that is sensitive to, let's say, some environmental condition. So, crude example, let's say cold and hot. Okay, if the climate's really cold, I'm going to produce this kind of silk. If it's really hot, I'm going to produce this kind of silk. So you have to have some mechanism that first of all recognizes what is the climate. Is it hot? Is it cold? and if it's hot, then it's going to send a signal down and say, okay, which pathway? Are we going to produce this one or are we going to produce this one? Okay, so we have all these different layers, and we have to have then programs, regulatory genes that will select which of these introns and which of these exons are going to be removed. So it's very, very multi-layered, right, to produce all these different proteins. Now, you have to have more than these cells. Scientists have recognized that these glands, remember there's 7 pairs of these glands, 7 different kinds of silk, 7 different glands. So the study that I just pointed to was only looking at this one gland, and they were trying to identify what's being produced where in the gland. And it's not all the same. So there are actually different regions within this gland. So in these sections here, there's where these sphenoid cells are producing these different proteins. And then this sac area here is going to store them at a pH, a very controlled pH of about 7. Then in the next region, in C, this is where all of those auxiliary molecules are being produced. The lipids, the glycoproteins, the proteins, they're important for coating the fiber, are being produced here. And so they're all going to get drawn in through this duct, and we'll talk about where that goes in a second. But what's interesting is that in that duct, there's a lowering of the pH. It drops the pH to 6.3 to 5.7 in that range. Now, how do you change the pH?
Acid.
Huh?
Acids.
Well, so we have, it's ions, right? So we have to have ion pumps. So we have little proteins that are built into the walls of these that will actively transport ions, so like hydrogen ions, phosphate ions, in and out of here to adjust the pH and drop the pH. Now, there's a reason for that. And of course, the spider knows nothing about biochemistry, right? But the reason for that is that in that lower environment, it helps induce the sticking together of all these proteins that are getting produced. That's what this is, antiparallel dimerization. We're sticking these polymer elements together, and it happens best at a lower pH than 7. Then the other thing that happens in the duct is that water is removed. So again, we have another set of proteins that will actively transport water out of that mixture, because taking the water out of those proteins actually strengthens the fibers. So we have to have another set of proteins that will do that. And then finally, they recognize that the pulling forces, so as the spider is pulling out or is generating the silk, the pulling action of the spider itself is actually helping to align the fibers and make them stronger. So you see what we're going to have to do. We're going to emulate spider silk. We've got to pay attention to all these different dynamics. How many different proteins do we need to put into the mix? Do we need to lower the pH? And then when we're drawing out the protein, what action, what mechanics are you going to use to draw those out? So can we do it? Maybe, but we've got to pay attention to all these things that spiders do. All right, so we're letting all this silk go out the duct. Where does the duct go? So here's the glands, here's the duct coming out, and then there are these structures here, and they're kind of trying to blow them up here. So there's these structures on the abdomen of the spider called spinnerets. And on the surface of the spinneret, you can't see it here, so they blow it up here for you. So here's that duct that's coming out. That's the silk that's coming out here is technically liquid at the moment. And then it doesn't become solid until it gets drawn out. But so we have what's called here is a spigot. And at the base of the spigot, there's a little valve. It's controlled by a muscle. And the control of this valve will determine how the thickness of that silk is. So, and also the flow. the flow rate. So we have a number of things that we have to think about. So one, remember there's 7 different kinds of silk. They don't all come out, they split them up between spinnerets. So one pair of spinnerets is going to be responsible for emitting just a couple of the types of silk. So we have to have different pairs of spinnerets. Non-silk or orb weaving spiders don't have as many spinnerets. Realize that there has to be muscular control. Those spinnerets are not just objects on the abdomen, they actually can move around. So they have to have muscular to them to help direct the production of the silk. And then each of these spinnerets has multiple spigots on them. So we're controlling the, well, again, like I said, the flow rate and the diameter of the silk. They can actually adjust that. So here's a photomicrograph of one of the spinnerets. And so what you're seeing here, here's these spigots, and you can see, a couple of them, we can see some silk that is coming out of them. So there's multiple spigots on a spinneret. These hairs that are coming out here, they're sensory. So they're giving feedback to the spider as they're undergoing this process of putting out the silk. So now the question is, okay, so I make the silk, I'm spinning my web. How do you walk around on a silk fiber, a spider fiber? So in this diagram, just to kind of get you oriented, so this line here, that's the web. So it's very, very small. Then up here, so these are the main claws. Now all spiders, whether they're web spinning or not, they will have the claws on here. This is how they grab onto things. So when you see a spider walking up the wall, it's because they have these notched claws that will allow it to grab onto things. Even glass, though you think it's smooth, is not smooth. It's pitted. And these claws are small enough they can hook onto those pits and walk. But these claws are not going to help you walk around on a spider web because the spider web is too thin. They're not going to help you. So spiders that have spider webs have these other structures. These are serrated bristles. These are kind of elastic. So they've got little notches and structures on them. And so when they step onto the web, it will push these down, and they have elastic energy that they'll store in there. And then there's this structure here, a middle hook. This middle hook actually has the ability to move. So when they step down on the web, it'll press down these serrated bristles, and they'll get pressed down further with that middle claw. And so that middle claw actually has musculature. So someone went and dissected one of these things and identified the muscles that are there that will actually make that claw move up and down. Right? So here's what a photomicrograph, what one looks like. All right. So here's the main claw. You can see how good that would be at gripping onto things. Here are these serrated bristles. Again, that they have that elastic energy that are going to respond. So when this middle claw gets lifted up, they can just bounce right off the web. They don't stay stuck on it. So here's that middle claw. It's going to move up and down. These, again, these would be sensory hairs. They're going to pick up information for the spider. All right, so how does a spider build a web? Okay, there's actually a defined process for doing it. So here we've got a couple branches that are sitting out there. The spider might, in some cases, just rely on the wind. They'll just push out some web, let the wind catch it, and let it catch the other branch. Okay? And so then it's going to pull it taut. So here's the little spider sitting right there. We'll pull it taut. Then it will walk across that web, and as it's doing that, it's going to release some other silk. So it's going to release a loop of silk and attach it to this end here. And it's going to climb back onto this web, and it's going to pull it down to some other structure, right? Then, after it's got this triangular frame, then it's gonna start building radial arms in here. And so it just becomes more and more elaborate in building those radii. After it's built all the radii, then it puts down this auxiliary silk that I mentioned before. This is just a walking platform to be able to navigate around here and to then put down the sticky stuff, okay? So it's gonna walk around on this green silk here to put down the blue stuff that is the sticky silk. So let's see if I can get this guy to work. I'm gonna do it. Darn. Sorry, no video. No. Worked on my computer at home. Now we'll skip by.
I have a question.
Yeah, question.
Do all spiders form the same type of web?
No. No. So even within web spinning spiders, spider experts actually can kind of tell one spider from another just by looking at its web. They have some unique construction. Now they're going to have some similarities, but they'll be different not only in the form or the shape of the web, but also in the material that they spin out as the web. They're not all in, because some people thought, oh well, we can figure out the evolutionary tree of spiders by taking a look at the proteins in their web material. Doesn't work. Makes a complete mess. Every spider's different.
So the different proteins for each kind of what, like
Yeah, I'm not vastly different,
Okay.
but under protein analysis, different than that. They're not the same thing. So now, of course, why are we building this web in the first place? We're not doing it to make something pretty. It's very functional. It's to catch a prey. But they'll actually use different strategies to catch different prey. So some scientists were watching this particular spider and recorded the types of strategies. So one is to wrap and bite. So the insect gets caught in the web, they go up and they wrap the insect in some silk, and then they will bite it and they will inject a toxin into the insect, which will paralyze it. Not necessarily kill it, just keep it from moving, paralyze it. And then they may, at that time or at a later time, save it for later, they will inject digestive fluids into the insect that will digest the stuff outside the spider's body, and then it will digest the soft material inside the insect or whatever it's eating, and then it will suck those up, okay? So sometimes they will do wrap and bite. In the case of grasshoppers, 100% of the time, okay? And the reason is because grasshoppers are slow and stupid, okay? They get stuck in the web and they just kind of sit there. And so it's easy just to go wrap it up and bite it and hey, got a grasshopper for dinner. But flies become a little bit more problematic because sometimes the flies will try and get out. And what do they do when they do that? Well, then they start making a mess of the web. And they actually get themselves stuck in the web. So one of the things that they will do is say, we got to calm this guy down. And so they will bite this fly first. They'll inject the poison to calm it down. And of course, now you've made a mess on my web. So they will pull that insect out of the web. They'll wrap it up, but they'll pull it out. And then they have to go back and repair the web. You got to go fix that web. But then here's another strategy is to bite it first and then wrap it up. This is what happens with moths. Why is that? Well, moths have a unique adaptation. They have scales on their wings. That's why they have colors. Those scales fall off. So the scales will stick to the sticky part of the web, and then the moth can fly away and leave the scales behind. So the spider says, whoa, 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 you're not getting out of here that quickly. So they will bite that one first and then wrap it up. So point being, the spider has to know what is the right strategy to use to immobilize my prey. There's not a one-size-fits-all strategy for immobilizing their prey, which is interesting. So that brings us to this idea of innate behaviors. How does a spider know how to make that web? Now, some people think, well, is it a learned behavior, perhaps?
I mean, it seems innate because, I mean, given the way that spiders are produced in most cases, it seems kind of hard. You know, this is like to be a source to learn from.
Right, well, what do spiders do? When they hatch out of their eggs, out of that egg case, they disperse.
Yeah.
So they don't hang around mom to have mom teach them how to make a web. They leave. So they're on their own. And as they grow up, they start spinning webs. No one taught them that. One of the studies that they did was to take a look at comparing, okay, what about young spiders versus mature spiders? Do they improve on their web? Do they, in a sense, learn to make a web better? And funny, they don't. They don't. In fact, the more mature spiders' webs are actually more sloppy. I said, well, maybe I'll need to work this hard. Yeah. So the young spiders actually will produce better looking webs than the more mature, which is another signal to us that this is not a learned behavior. It is innate. Now, this becomes a really big problem in terms of explaining things in evolutionary terms. How do you get these programmed behaviors? Because you need several things to make these things work. One, you need sensors. Spider has to know certain things in order to be able to spin its web. It needs to have sense of orientation. What's up? What's down? What's north? What's south? Spiders have even been shown to be able to do spatial mapping. They know what is where on their web. They can remember where at least 3 different prey are on the web. So they have this ability to create a mental map. Now you can do that, right? You've got a map in your head of, let's say, the Mines campus. You know where everything's at. Maybe you've been here long enough, you could go there blindfolded, right? You've got this mental map. Well, the spiders can do that too. So you have to have these sensors, first of all. And those sensors are going to send information to the spider's brain, which is about the size of a sesame seed. Really tiny, okay? And so we have a certain kind of neural circuitry that has to be set up. Now, to be fair, we have no idea how any of this is set up. How do you construct neural circuitry to be able to process information? And we have different kinds of circuitry. We've got sensory, so the information from sensors to go to the brain is one type of neural pathway. And then we have motor nerves. So once the brain has decided what's the next thing to do, there has to be another set of nerves that goes out to the muscles, which muscles are going to be used. And the hardest one to figure out is this processing circuitry. Okay, how do we take all this inputted information and make decisions? But the decisions are more than just decisions, they are algorithms. Based on the information that I'm getting, what are the step-by-step procedures that I will go through to construct this web? And realize that these programmed behaviors have to, in some way, be adaptive. If a spider is going to spin a web, does it always have to find 2 sticks that are exactly 17 centimeters apart? No. So it can work in various settings to still construct the web. So it has to be adaptive. It has to be flexible in some fashion. And like I mentioned in terms of prey capture, it has to be able to collect information about the prey, feed that into the processing unit, and decide which behaviors am I going to bite and wrap? Am I going to wrap and bite? Which one am I going to do? And so then we have to have proper physiological responses that are all connected with these. So this is a real problem in terms of evolutionary biology. In a book that came out just a couple years ago, really interesting, it's called Animal Algorithms. This talks very, very broadly about all the like navigational systems that we see in birds and turtles, lobsters. There's a surprising number of animals that have these abilities to navigate. And this guy, the guy who wrote this book, he's an expert in navigation systems in airplanes. Okay? So he knows what does it take to create navigation systems. We see those same things in animals. How do we get those? And then he also talks specifically about innate behaviors. How do you explain in evolutionary terms all these coordinating all of these things that have to come together to produce what we call innate behaviors, right? Out of the egg, a spider can do it. Now, the other thing we'll think about is, so we've got all these features of spiders. What's the best way to explain how this web spinning and web production all came about? So we can think about top down versus bottom up. So bottom up is what we have in evolutionary biology. So we get biology in terms of development, it's based on random mutations that happen to the genes. And then we get natural selection that decides, is that a good mutation or not? Does it work for us? Okay? And how many of these can we do at once? Well, kind of one at a time, right? One at a time. What are the chances that we could get multiple mutations all at the same time and they all work together?
Infinitesimal.
Infinitesimal.
Not really, however, there can always, a series of natural mutations could be retroactively made positive through a single mutation.
Well, the problem is that when what we're seeing here with spider biology, these are mutations that have to occur to multiple systems. So nervous system, muscular system, exoskeleton, all of these are very, very different systems that have to, at the same time, get these certain mutations, and they have to work together.
That would also suppose like enough time for those mutations to be carried forward unchanging so that
Right.
the system can be completed.
And realize that in evolutionary biology, every time we have a mutation, it has to confer an advantage. Now, sometimes we think about, okay, there's neutral, perhaps we have neutral mutations, but that doesn't help us get anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, because assuming you just give the mutation to one system and need it in several, the mutation to one would probably disadvantage the organism, so it wouldn't be around in 20 years to
Right.
start
Right.
developing the others.
Yeah, because and this is where we get some of the chicken and egg kind of problems. Are you gonna produce a structure that's fundamentally functionless and let it sit there until there's something else comes along that it can work with? No, because you have an energetics problem. Why produce this new structure and have it not do anything? That's a waste of energy and resources, okay? So the thing that we see with a bottom-up approach is that it cannot access things like foresight, insight, purpose. Can't be a purpose to it. It's just a random change that just happened to work out. As opposed to also like interdependence of systems, if that happens, it's just purely accidental. And if you get two that work together, wow, that's just like amazing. So a top-down though does require foresight, insight, purpose. Why are we constructing all of these things? A top-down approach is going to take a big problem and it's going to break it down into more manageable steps, more manageable parts to construct. And it will then in effect anticipate interdependence, that we will necessarily need different things to work together. So, but you have to have some insight and forethought. So what does that look like for a spider? So we can break this down into three big tasks. What do we got to do? So first of all, we have to think about material. We've got to produce a material. Once we've made the material, we have to figure out how to deliver it. And then we have to have a set of procedures that have to be set up for the construction of the web. So remember, we said in terms of web production, we need two things. We need cells that are going to produce the protein, but we also need the glands because they're contributing a lot in terms of the biochemistry of making the webs. So we have to have all of these things vector lined up. So all the translation, transcription, RNA splicing, epigenetics, all that are going to be targeted for producing protein. Remember that just that one protein, there were 18 different proteins that are getting produced. In the gland, what do we have? So remember, it's not just these cells and how they're arranged, but we have to have all those associated molecules. We have to have ion pumps, we have to have water pumps, all so that we can produce that fiber. It's not just the protein, it's a whole fiber that's more complex. To deliver the material, we have to have our spinnerets. Remember, it's 3 pairs of spinnerets because we've got 7 glands to be using to deliver. And so we have to have muscular, so we've got a muscle system here. We have to have spigots and valves. These are parts of the exoskeleton. They're all going to be constructed from different genes in order to place the web. And then if you're going to build a web, well, doggone it, you better be able to walk on the web. So we have to have this modified tarsi in the foot of the spider. And so we have that middle hook, which remember, that's a new structure, right? No other non-silk spinning or non-web spinning spiders don't have that middle hook. And these serrated bristles are also unique. And then that middle hook has musculature that has to get tied to it to make it move up and down. So all of that to be able to navigate on the web. And then in terms of innate behaviors, just a sampling, we have to have at least these 4. We have to have some kind of program, reprogrammed to, 1, find the site. Can the spider just spin a web anywhere? Not anywhere. Okay, so where am I going to do it? And then how do I construct the web? How am I going to catch the prey? And if my web gets damaged, spiders actually can go through their web, identify places where it's been broken, and they can repair it. And so each of those we have to think about all of these. We have to have sensors, we have to have neural circuitry, we have to have algorithms somehow wired into the system to give the spider what step-like things they need to do, and then we have to have appropriate physiological responses. Okay? The question is, if we're trying to design a spider who can build a web, which is a better explanation for how this comes about? Is it top-down or bottom-up? Because to make this happen, every single one of these would have to have multiple gene mutations, all conspiring together at the same time to do that. Or does it make more sense to think that this was a top-down approach? So unfortunately, here's where Spider-Man comes in. I told you there was Spider-Man. Yes. Yes. Okay, you remember Peter Parker? How did he acquire all of his superpowers? One bite from? Not just any spider, a radioactive spider. Somehow that makes it different. Now, exactly what a radioactive spider is, I don't know. And why a radioactive spider would be different, I don't know. But Marvel likes to do this, right? Was it the, what's the 4? Fantastic Four? But they get blasted, they're out in space and they get blasted with radiation, and all of a sudden they have all these superpowers. X-Men, they just have to have a little gene mutation, and all of a sudden they have all these superpowers. So we're kind of tainted by the Marvel universe. It gets us thinking that the ability to acquire these special behaviors is pretty simple. All you have to have is just bite me with a radioactive spider, and now I'm producing silk, and I can climb buildings, and I'm sticky, and all these other things, right? So we have a tendency to overestimate the power of mutations, that we can do that. But we know for a fact most genetic mutations are actually deleterious. They're harmful, and they get washed out of the system by natural selection. Very, very few of them could even be considered positive, and almost none of them produce new information. Yeah.
But the counterpoint is that even if we overestimate the power of mutations, we might be underestimating the power of time.
Well, what do you mean by that? Elaborate.
I mean, again, this assumes that old Earth is true, but like, you know, something on the order of 1 billion years is a very long time. And, you know, even an astronomically unlikely amount of useful mutations can still accumulate to build more complex systems.
So they can, but here's the problem. And so they've done this bacterial, and bacterial is not a good model for higher organisms because they can have thousands and thousands of generations in a very short period of time. But in bacteria, they've taken a look at how long does it take for a genetic mutation to fixate into the population, okay? And what they've looked at is like about 8,000 generations. Now, you map that up onto something like humans, or something that has a lifespan that's years instead of minutes or hours. All of a sudden, 1 billion years is not long enough. 1 million years is not enough. So time actually is problematic for mutations.
I have some thoughts about that, but we can.
Yeah. Okay, so here's where you get to shoot back to me then, okay? So in anything that I said about spiders, did we see anything in there about information processing? Okay, so one, we have neural circuitry, where we have to intake information, we have to process information, and then output information. Right, so there's one. What else?
I mean, there's the determination of what to do with prey that's caught in the web.
Okay, so.
And having to detect what's most optimal in
Right.
that situation and what type of
Alright, so even within that adaptive features, flexibility or plasticity to the behavior,
I was just thinking about like them knowing how to navigate their web.
okay? So this ability, a kind of innate ability to be able to walk on the web is more than just having those structures on the ends of the feet.
We saw irreducible complexity in some of the protein structures.
Okay, so we have some of that. But we also have that in information processing. Remember we talked about the gene splicing that has to happen to be able to get multiple different kinds of protein. Okay, what about novel structures? Did we see any novel structures that are possessed by the fork weaver spiders? Okay, they've got the hooks and the bristles on the ends of their tarsi. Spinnerets. Okay, and the spigots and valves and things that are involved in delivering the protein. Those are novel structures. We don't find them in other insects or other arthropods. Crabs don't have spinnerets. Crabs don't have hooks like that on the feet. So what about irreducible complexity? We'd have to dive a little deeper to get to some of these. And certainly in some of the protein structures. So like the pumps, the ion pumps that we have to reduce the pH and remove water from the protein. What about chicken and egg? What are some chicken and egg problems that you noticed?
What came first, the silk production or the spinnerets?
Okay. Doesn't help us to produce silk if I don't have the spinnerets to put the material out. But the spinnerets, why make a spinneret if I don't have the silk, right?
I mean, you could just say the web production in general and the ability to navigate the webs.
Okay, right? So those little hooks in the tarsi, right?
Yeah.
No
And just
point
like
in having the hook in the tarsi if you don't have a web to walk on.
And just neurologically.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and of course, all the innate behaviors kind of fall in this category, right? You need a sensor. But why have a sensor for orientation if you're not going to build a web? But then you have to be able to process that information and have a physiological response that matches it.
I guess it's true with most biological systems, but the information contained in DNA or the building blocks.
Yep.
The sacs that maintain the pH for the silk when the silk needs the sacs to properly.
Yeah, if we're going to properly develop the tensile strength of this, then we've got to have a system for dropping the pH, but you wouldn't have that unless you first had the silk, right? There's a lot of them. There's a lot of these chicken and egg problems that we see here. Okay, and then we talked about innate behaviors. Lots of those that we see. And then, to me, it seems like system engineering is a better explanation for getting web production to happen than something from bottom up. Yeah.
I like with the silk, how you have the mechanical process of having to align the fibers in conjunction with the chemical process of producing the silk.
Yeah.
Yet have these two different systems that were both necessary to perform a single function.
Right. Okay. And then there certainly is a case where we see humans are interested in designing things. It's going to take a lot of design effort on the part of humans to replicate silk. Where did we get the idea to do that? Spiders. And we're actually going to learn how to do it by figuring out how spiders do it. What does that tell us about the spiders? If it's going to take us lots of energy, mental energy, physical energy, material energy to produce systems that can make silk, what does that tell you about silk production in spiders? Right?
Yeah, pretty.
Okay, so what kind of conclusions do we actually get from intelligent design? Where can this lead us? So first of all, realize that I think it's important to recognize that the idea or the theory of intelligent design is founded on an ensemble of evidence. It's not just one thing. It's not just bacterial flagellum and ta-da, intelligent design. But what I was trying to show you with the spiders is it's not just one thing. It's many, 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 many things that are inferences to us of intelligent agency. And remember, science by itself does not exclude immaterial causes. So if we see evidences for intelligent agency that we recognize elsewhere in the world, and we see that in a spider, what should we conclude? So I think it's a strong conclusion there was some intelligence behind this. But some people will claim that, well, you're coming about this because you have some kind of religious motivation. And intelligent design theorists will say, no, 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 no. What we're trying to do is explain biology. We're trying to explain what is the best way to get the spider web. Is it by random mutations or is it by system engineering? Right? Now, if we say that there had to be some intelligent agency behind them, does that have some religious implications? Certainly, but then you deal with that separately. But that does not necessarily mean that identifying intelligent agency within spider biology is religiously motivated.
It's because it was aliens.
Who was aliens? Okay. So now here's the thing we have to really be careful about is that intelligent agency does not, while it identifies that there is an intelligent agent, it doesn't identify the agent. It doesn't get us to Jesus, right? But that's okay. It's still useful to us because it becomes one of many arguments in what we call the cumulative case for the existence of God. And what does Hebrews say about your faith? In order to please God, what do you first have to do? You have to believe that God exists. So this really is foundational. This really is important. But again, even our arguments for the existence of God are not singular. They are multiple. So I've shown this one before because I think it's cute and clever. But remember Dr. Dwyman, when he was here, he kind of made the same case. You know, he focused on one argument for the existence of God, but there's not just one argument. So here we are with spiders. You know, coffee is masterfully designed. Agree or disagree? I don't know. So that's our what we call teleological argument. This argument for design. But we have Other arguments, the moral argument, our favorite, the ontological argument. We have miracles, we have beauty, we have Pascal's wager, we have argument from free will. So all of these, so we've got, a dozen and more different arguments for the existence of God. Intelligent agency or intelligent design is but one. Okay?
It's awesome.
So we're not gonna depend on spiders, right, to reveal the existence of God, but I think it's there. All right, so questions from you guys? Yeah.
So this is the counter, this is what I wanted to elaborate on. So I understand the point you made about 8,000 generations of bacteria. However, this is my surface level knowledge with like AP bio coming in. From what I learned about the way that genes are often described, the actual substantial genes producing proteins are often dwarfed in comparison to all the genes that actually control when that specific gene is expressed.
Right. So only 2% of the genome is actually coded for protein construction. The rest is regulatory.
What it implies to me is that again, I'm making that sort of alternative. I'm trying to like foster a debate about this, where it's like, even if it might take an extreme amount of generations to arrive at that point, the thing is that the length it takes to develop those adaptations might have necessitated the creation of easier ways to foster useful mutations.
Right, and I think that's worth thinking about, that we have genetic systems that are pliable. That animals existing can be flexible, not just in their behavior, but in some of their physiology, to lead to better adaptive mechanisms, because the world changes. We're living in a dynamic world.
Yeah, I'm not trying to like just discard your argument. I was just trying to make it more foolproof.
Yep, thanks. Cool.
Are there biological systems in humans where you encounter the same chicken and egg problem?
Huge.
Like what examples? Because I couldn't think of any just now.
Okay. Well, we can just go for real simple. Okay. So you have a digestive system and you have a respiratory system. Right? Will your digestive system function without your respiratory system?
Probably not.
No, because it just so happens the cells in your respiratory system need oxygen. Oh, but how are they going to get there? How is that oxygen going to get there?
The cardiovascular system.
Oh, the cardiovascular system. Okay. Does the cardiovascular system need oxygen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it need nutrients from the food that you digested in your digestive system?
Yeah.
And it builds from there. It's crazy. Yeah.
Are there differences between boy and girl spiders?
Yes. Do you want to know one? Sure. Okay, so the little house spider that's crawling up your wall, look really close. The male spiders have little palps up front, so they're not legs, they're palps, different structure. And they look like little boxing gloves. So the males will have these little boxing glove palps, the female will not. Now here's where we get sexy, okay?
Thank you for coming, everyone. Free to head out.
So for spiders to reproduce, the male spider will spin a little platform web, and then it will deposit its sperm packet on the platform web. Then it's the palps, the boxing glove palps, will use to pick up that sperm packet and place it up inside a cavity in the female's abdomen. Now here's the catchy part. Those boxing gloves from that male spider fit lock and key to the female's abdomen. So if he tries to put the sperm in the wrong kind of spider, bad news. Okay? So that's how you can look for the little boxing gloves.
Keep that in mind.
I'm not going to pay attention to that. They're going to be more focused on trying to get out of my house.
Yeah.
Kind of want to go back to your philosophical argument that God he can still be imperfect. I want to argue that God can be perfect, but we're in an imperfect world.
Yep.
So where anything that God does is still perfect, but since we were given free will, we have the opportunity to be
So we have to be careful when we use the word perfect.
Okay.
Okay, I think probably as far as, especially when we're thinking about God, and we think about this in terms of like God being good. So if we say it's perfect, what God makes is perfect, or what God makes is good, it's the way it ought to be. And it's not for us to decide the way things ought to be. We can't measure goodness or perfection based on that. So the things are in the way they are in the world because that's the way God thought they ought to be, and therefore they are, in a sense, perfect.
I mean, yeah, I would argue that. And people might say like, diseases or like famine,
Yeah.
But I also like bring that to a larger picture that we don't see, So you can see you can see throughout time, to the end.
What was a long-range purpose, and we don't have access to that.
Right, but so that's why I still think that God would be considered, as I say, perfect,
Right. Well, so when we call something imperfect, who's adjudicating that?
Us.
Us.
Right.
Right. So we don't have like the full-scale picture. Is that really perfect, or is this really the best way for this to be?
Well, yeah, so that's why I don't think we can decide that,
I think we just have to say it's all good. Because God does, right?
Well, yeah.
He made his creation, he stepped back
That's
and
why you
said,
trust in him, right?
it's good. It's good. And I don't have to like it. But I have to trust him that what he did and the way he did it is the best way for human flourishing and for the outcome that God sees at the end of history, which we don't have access to. Right.
I just had a question about a biological fact, or I guess rumor right now.
Rumor.
Is it true that spiders will recycle their silk by eating it?
Some. Okay, not all. But for instance, if a web is damaged, they will eat some of that silk and then they'll digest it and reuse those amino acids. Some spiders will actually tear down their web and build a new one every day. So they'll recycle. So yes, that's true. When they climb back up the silk web, they will collect that silk. They'll eat it and recycle it. We need to probably wrap up here. So I'll hang around if you got more questions.
Just for Mecky's curiosity, I just looked it up. Spider silk is about 145 nanometers across, as compared to aramid fibers that are about 10 microns across. So about 100 times smaller. For 10, I can't do multiplication.
That's crazy. Thank you, Carl. Super quick and then I'll let you go. First things first, if you were gazing at my awesome, incredible, fancy, wonderful shirt, and I know you were, you can have one on your very own. We have extras from last year when we ordered them. And so if you would like them, I saw small, medium, large. I didn't look, but I'm sure there's at least one extra large if you need it.
No, there's no extra large.
I lied. Sorry. There's most sizes and shirts, so if you would like one and you don't have one, come talk to Carl after, and it would be $10. We do make you pay a fee to show that you are committed. So we're not just giving that for free, but it's $10. That's super cheap, and it's actually like it's a high quality T-shirt. And if you want to know about the organization that made them, it's like a inner city. What would you call it?
Inner city ministry that helps get people off the street.
Right.
And people to
So it's very cool.
get these shirts.
Yeah, it's a cool way, kind of as a ministry, to help those who are homeless or struggling for a job or things like that. So definitely would encourage supporting it and getting a shirt if you'd like one. 2 is we will be whiteboarding in 2 weeks. For those of you who gained whiteboarding today, thank you. That means a lot. I hope it was beneficial. We'd love to hear stories or ways you were challenged. If you have anything, please talk to us. The topic will be determined, but if you'd like to know ahead of time, send me a message or send a message in the group me. And once we figure it out, we'll let you know if you want material. Yes?
Is the topic to be determined or is it determinism?
Oh no!
I mean,
clever.
Good catch.
Very clever. Maybe. You might have just convinced me. Too bad.
I have a counter idea, but.
Alright, I'm willing to hear suggestions. I can't guarantee we'll do them, but I'll hear them. Lastly, group me an email. those are the two ways to stay updated. If you're not in the group me or you're not on the email list, I would super highly encourage it. If it turns out to be annoying with like one message per week, you could mute it. But it's a great way to know what talks are coming up. So that way you could be like this morning, you get a text from me that has terrible Spider-Man puns and you're like, oh, it's about spiders. And so you know you want to come stop by. So it's a way to be informed. I would encourage it. And then next week, we will actually not be having a presenter. It's gonna be a little bit different. We do this once or twice a semester. It'll be a time where we'll get together and we'll sort of research different topics or objections to Christianity or common claims that people throw out. You'll get a chance to talk amongst yourselves, think about it, how would discussions like this go, what would we say, and it's gonna culminate in one person from each group sort of giving a mini presentation of that, and then we'll kind of do a studied response after. So it's a little more discussion, hopefully a little more fun, just hanging out with people, talking, challenging one another. So I would highly encourage it, hopefully a good time. That is all. I'm gonna super quickly pray us out, and then you're free. Thanks for staying so long, but it was super duper interesting. So. Dear Lord, thank you for this evening. Thank you for each person here as we prayed at the beginning. Thank you for spiders and the amazing biology with them. Most of it goes over my head, but it is amazing. So we thank you for that. Bless each student as they go from here, as they go through the week. Help them with discipline and homework and strength. And let us be excited to proclaim your handiwork. Not timid, but truly happy and confident and proud of the work that you have done and how we can excitedly exclaim about the incredible biology that you've created in every organism, not just spiders. So we praise you for that, and in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Thanks, everybody.
So bring it next week.
Yeah,
Go back to the room.
I can't remember where I saw this. Wait till they're gone.